If Australia has a dead heart, it must lie here. In the driest of all continents, this vast wasteland of sand ridges and parched salt lakes ranks as one of the most desolate and forbidding places on Earth. Few animals choose to live here. Those that do use their wits to survive. For man, the ultimate challenge is to cross the desert on foot, carrying his own food, and like the Aborigines a century before him, find enough water to last the length of his journey.
Well, if I'm going to do an unaided crossing of the desert, it's most important I find this little dot out here in this vast area, because without that water I just simply cannot carry enough for the whole journey. I've got to find that water to enable me to get through unaided. There it is again.
Denis Bartell locates an Aboriginal well which has lain forgotten under the sand drifts for 80 years. With 30 desert crossings behind him, Bartell has abandoned his four-wheel drive vehicle in favor of a hand cart and a pair of hiking boots. He's the first white man to walk across the desert from west to east without a support team. Now he wants to make the first solo trek across Australia from north to south, passing through the very centre of the Simpson Desert.
Oh, how's everyone? Welcome to Escott. Nice to see you. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. It's been a long trip.
Escott Station is a cattle property and tourist ranch on the Gulf of Carpentaria. This is where Bartell will stay until he's ready to start walking south.
Well, what we're going to endeavour to do is a solo walk from the Gulf, or from Burketown, to Gulf of Carpentaria to Gulf of St Vincent, which is 2,400 kilometres away, near Adelaide. So it's across Australia, Gulf to Gulf.
Took us long enough to fly here.
Well, we've just flown up and I got second thoughts, I think.
A long way. It's a long walk.
Horses have been used to muster cattle in the Gulf country since the 1860s. The first cattlemen rode in with their herds from southern Queensland and South Australia, and they were so impressed by the land between the Albert and Nicholson rivers, they named it the Plains of Promise. That promise holds good today, but with huge cattle runs like Escott Station, horses are mainly for the tourists. Nowadays, most of the mustering is done from the air, just above the treetops. These rogue bulls have never been mustered before, and they have to be run to ground before it's safe to go near them. Once the hind legs are securely bound, the animal can be loaded onto a truck and taken to the stockyards. Even inside the yards, it's not uncommon for an outraged bull to smash through the railings and escape back into the bush. An intricate web of creeks and rivers empty into the warm, muddy waters of the Gulf of Carpentaria. Torrential rain and swampy mudflats along the coast forced the explorers Burke and Wills to turn back a few kilometres before they reached the sea, after making their epic south-to-north crossing of the continent in 1861. Denis Bartell has chosen a more difficult course than Burke and Wills, and for him, the journey won't end until he empties the contents of this bottle into the Gulf of St. Vincent at Glenelg. Progress has bypassed Burketown, but even so, there's a strong feeling of community pride, and almost everyone turned out to farewell the desert walker.
Denis is going to work from Burketown to Glenelg on the Gulf of St. Vincent in South Australia, which is a distance of 2,400 kilometres. He's going to do this unaided without support.
The 52-year-old adventurer is given honorary citizenship and a passport which entitles the bearer to a free meal of fish and chips and a cold beer at every pub in the Berkshire.
Len and Alan and townspeople of Burketown, thank you very much for this very warm send-off. It's much appreciated. It will set me on my way very nicely, thank you.
With the formalities completed, it was time for Bartell to shoulder his backpack and take the first step of his 2,400-kilometre trek to St. Vincent's Gulf.
This is a kind of a Rosetta Stone. It gives us the clues to tie what we understand here in to that of the rest of the world, and it'll also give us the best understanding for the whole of the continent. And we're really, we're in a whole new game here. It's a stunning place.
Paleontologist Dr. Michael Archer describes Riversley, the richest fossil deposit in Australia. 15 million years ago, the limestone rocks and hills of Riversley formed the base of a dense rainforest, teeming with a staggering array of animals and birds. Now it's a graveyard, and every hammer blow reveals another clue in the complex evolutionary history of this unique land. Since leaving Burketown, Denis Bartell had stayed close to the Gregory River. It was an unexpected bonus to find Dr. Archer and his group of volunteer fossil hunters camped near the site of their most extraordinary discoveries.
Well, already we're dealing with about 50 new kinds of animals that have never been seen before we started working this area. Among these things is just as an example, is an animal that, for want of a better thing, we call Thingodonta. It's just weird. It has one of the highest coefficients of weirdity of anything I've ever seen. If you think about the level of distinction that attends being a bat, or being a whale, or a primate, those are ordinal levels of distinction. Like if we just discovered a whale for the first time, it'd be about as distinct as what we've just found here, this thing we're calling Thingodonta. It's that fundamentally a different kind of an animal. It's not only unique to here, it's never been seen anywhere else in the world before.
2 weeks on the road, and Bartell was beginning to feel a nagging pain in his right knee. The injury would trouble him for the rest of the journey.
I had that bad trot coming into Camberwell in the first stage of the journey. That's been pretty good. My knee is hurt, but nothing that I can't cope with. I'm a little bit concerned, though, with the weakness of it. When I come to heading out into the desert, I'm going to have to carry around about 115, 120 pounds on my back. And if it's going to give out, that's where it'll happen. Then I walked down from Birktown.
At Camberwell, Bartell picked up his handcart, which meant he could carry more food and water and relieve the burden on his back.
How long have you been here?
I was born here.
Were you? Oh, you'd know the area pretty well. Which is the track out?
Oh, you can go out here and go down Happy Creek, or 9 mile and you go through Mudgee and go to Austral that way.
Austral Downs, Argadagada, Uratipra, Lucy Creek, Jervois, Atula. All cattle stations in the back blocks of the Northern Territory, linked by dusty tracks cut through a monotonous landscape.
Between Austral Downs and Uratipra station, I had I think it was 11 or 12 days without... I saw the odd vehicle, that was about it. And I carted water for the whole of that distance. It was a very heavy load. I worked out my cart would have weighed all up around about 250 pounds. Well, I worked very much to the clock. It's the only way I could achieve the mileages. I generally start off just after daybreak. That's my normal day, and I finish just on dark. My routine through the day is walk for an hour, have quarter off, walk for another hour, have a quarter off, and after about 3 or 4 hours I then have a half an hour break. Lunchtime I generally, by the time I do my radio call to the flying doctor base, that might develop into an hour and a half off, and then the same process for the afternoon, but I get slower and slower as the day goes on.
Mum and Dad in?
4 weeks after leaving Camooweal, Bartell arrived at Attula Station on the northern edge of the Simpson Desert. Roy Anderson runs 4,000 head of cattle along the floodplain of the Plenty River, but the river flows only once every 10 years or so, and the cattle have learned not to stray too far from the dams and bores.
Good morning, Mrs. Dwyer.
For station children like Debbie Jo Anderson, going to school means tuning the two-way radio into the Alice Springs School of the Air.
I've got a man walking across the desert.
A man walking across the desert. Whereabouts is he walking to?
To Adelaide, from Burketown to Adelaide.
From Burketown to Adelaide.
Goodness me, that's a long, long way.
It's her first year at school, and Debbie Jo's 16 classmates are scattered over an area larger than the United Kingdom.
What should you have written, Debbie Jo?
Oh.
You should have written, oh, you silly old sausage. Who did write?
Eight Alpha Juliet, Foxtrot Delta, Quebec.
For almost 60 years, the Royal Flying Doctor has provided a free aerial medical service to Australians living and travelling in remote areas. Funding comes from public donations, and for Bartell, the main purpose of his Gulf-to-Gulf walk was to raise more money for the Flying Doctor.
I did have a very sore knee. It's been playing up, but not as much as it was at Camooweal.
Yeah.
There it was swollen,
Yeah.
and I got some tablets to take for anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
So I think probably I'll just stick on those then.
Well, if they're working.
Yeah. It's
That's
sore in
fine.
the joint, but that's old age.
That's an old age.
Right, one off.
Oh.
Two off. Bye-bye, kids.
After a week at Attula Station, it was time to load up the cart and move on.
You close the gate.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Actually, I'm looking forward to the challenge now. It's been a long time getting here, and it's been a long, hard plod, but a few days rest, and now I want to get into it. I want to conquer the desert again.
From a satellite 700 kilometres above the Earth, Denis Bartell was able to obtain valuable information about the type of terrain he was about to encounter. Landsat makes regular passes over the Simpson Desert and sends back data which shows the type and density of vegetation on the ground. Later, Bartell would use Landsat images to help him set a new course through the desert. After leaving Attula Station homestead, Bartell travelled for a week along a sandy track which finally petered out at the boundary fence. This then was the beginning of his attempt to cross the desert unaided. Bartell was carrying enough food to see him through the Simpson, but his water supply was limited to 10 days and would have to be replenished at the Aboriginal native wells. Man hauling the handcart through corridors stunted with spinifex was no easy task. In fact, Bartell had to give up the idea of taking a more westerly course through the geographic centre of the desert because of the thick vegetation. Each day, just before sunset, Bartell would use the last hour of light to make camp and prepare his evening meal. Although he was only covering 12 kilometres a day, well short of his target, the desert walker had the satisfaction of knowing that he'd passed the halfway point on his Gulf-to-Gulf marathon.
I don't think I've ever really felt that I wanted to give it away. There's been times that I've been certainly very, very tired. I think one of those was yesterday, to be quite honest. I was looking at this big sandhill, which is just in front of me now. It's a very tall one. And I thought, I'll just make it to there. That's as far as I want to drag this darn cart. I've had enough.
It had been arranged that a television news crew would pick up the handcart when Bartell decided he couldn't drag it any further. Using station owner Roy Anderson as a guide, the two vehicles followed a broken trail of tyre marks and boot prints in the sand.
Yes, 5 Sierra Bravo X-ray, we can hear you, Denis. We are about 9 kilometres south of the boundary fence. 9 kilometres south of the boundary fence. We are still some way from you, so it'll take us another hour or more before we're even close to you. Over.
"10 hours driving and 2 punctures later, the party was still some distance from the desert walkers' camp. However, smoke on the horizon next morning confirmed that Bartell was on course and was waiting for the vehicles to arrive at a position he called Lone Gum Tree.
Where'd you guys get to?
Had a bit of trouble last night.
What happened?
We had you all the way, actually. Roy was tracking you all the way last night.
Yeah.
But, did a couple of tyres, didn't we, Roy?
Is that what occurred?
Yeah. It's been a long haul, hasn't it?
I've been doing, I suppose, 7, 8 miles a day, no more. And it's got to the stage where I'm wearing myself out. I could do in 2 hours what I can do in a whole day with the cart. So I've decided this is where my Shirley and I part company.
After giving up the handcart, Bartell had to face the prospect of completing the 400-kilometre desert crossing, carrying all his supplies on his back. Water was the most critical item and also the heaviest. So during a radio check to the Flying Doctor base at Alice Springs, Bartell decided to increase his margin of safety.
VJD 5 Sierra Bravo X-ray, good afternoon. All okay here. I've had to alter course slightly. I'm trying for one of the other native wells I know of, hoping to pick up water there. The distance to the original well was a bit great for me, so I'm trying for another one. It increases the overall distance. But if I win there, well, it'll help me with the overall crossing. How are you copping back?
He's a man of great courage and great fortitude, and he's so determined with anything he ever does. And I know he won't fail. And he has incredible knowledge of that area, and he will succeed, I have no doubt about that whatsoever.
Rotha Bartell talks about her husband, who gave up the comfortable lifestyle of a self-made millionaire to become an outback adventurer.
I don't know what it would be like to be married to a man who went off at 9 and came home at 5, as Denis keeps saying, with his newspaper tucked under his arm. I mean, that lifestyle I've never known in our 26 years of marriage, and it's just, I just never think about it as a different lifestyle, because to me it's just absolutely normal, which is strange to other people, I realise that, but we all laugh about it.
Sure, there's times, there's hours of a day when you think, gosh, really, I don't want to go any further. But I can conquer all that because I have a desire, a burning desire, to succeed in whatever challenge I give myself. And that is sufficient to carry me on. Well, the difficult thing for me to live with would be failure. That would be very, very hard. took off from the lone gun. It was about just after lunch. I finally made my last selection, packed my pack, and then tried to lift it, which was almost an impossible feat. I did finally succeed. I got onto my back and trudged off. I suppose by the end of that afternoon I was in trouble. I knew I was in trouble. I'd done about 4 hours walking. The pack was very, very heavy. I think well over 100 pounds. And it was quite a hot day, actually. I was perspiring quite freely. And I felt my energy going very, very quickly. As a matter of fact, I remember very clearly that afternoon counting my footsteps, and I'd count, say, to 100. And I'd walk 100 yards, and then I'd put my little walking stick under my pack and stand upright and rest. And I'd have a breather for a couple of minutes, and then I'd bend over again, take the weight, and I'd say, right, come on, let's do another 100 yards. And then it would get down to 50 yards. And the thing I dreaded most, of course, was trying to take the blessed pack off again. Because I had such a tremendous struggle to get it back under my shoulders. The following morning, I woke and my knee was very sore. And within an hour or two, it had gone completely. I had stabbing pain up my knee. My lower back, where I'd had an operation many years ago, was extremely sore. And that was it that morning. Come 11 o'clock or whenever it was, I had to make a very painful, very hurtful decision.
Departed Lone Gum Tree yesterday, midday.
Position: either battle on and risk physical injury, requiring lift out,
And therefore jeopardising the complete golf-to-golf walk, the fundraising for the Royal Flying Doctor Service, and the dedication of all those who have become involved in the venture.
or, considering those involved with me, the Royal Flying Doctor Service, my family, and as an example to others, I show a responsible attitude and accept now, while I am still well, defeat in my unaided crossing.
But however, continue on slowly with a reduced load and accept help. How do you copy back so far now, Peter?
5-0 Bravo X-ray, all loud and clear.
In consideration of all factors and not wishing to inconvenience or put at risk the lives of others, I am prepared to concede defeat in my unaided attempt. Sorry, Denis Bartell.
Having made the painful decision to accept assistance, Bartell got rid of as much food and water as he dared. With a much lighter pack and enough supplies for 5 days, he pushed on, hoping to make better daily mileages. At the Flying Doctor base, planning started for an airdrop of fresh supplies. And during the days that followed, the desert walker received messages of encouragement from his family and friends.
Heads on at the moment, and things I don't think could have got any worse. From now on, they can only be on the up and up, and just tell Glenelg I'm getting ready to walk in there one day.
Cruising 5500, I've been memory at 48.
5 days later, an aircraft loaded with cartons of food and tire tubes partly filled with water left Alice Springs to look for the desert walker.
Sierra Bravo X-ray, this is Sierra Romeo Golf. Do you read, Denis?
Finding Bartell was not easy. His radio transmission was too weak to receive in the aircraft, and after several hours flying, it was obvious the plane had gone well south of the lone walker's last known position.
Those lakes shouldn't be there, should they? We're too far east.
Half an hour after setting up a new search pattern, a flash of light was spotted among the clumps of spinifex.
Sierra Bravo X-ray, this is Sierra Romeo Golf. If you receive this, Denis, keep flashing your mirror. We have caught sight of your mirror. If you keep flashing the mirror, we can home in on that. Over.
After several low passes over Bartell's camp, the pilot lined the aircraft up for the food drop.
Go! Right, he's got the first one. Go, Chris, go!
With the food safely away, the water containers were next.
Go! Now I've got to keep finding him so I don't lose the bastard. Go, Chris, go! One burst. One made it, one burst.
Bartell now had enough fresh food and water to let him rest for 4 days before tackling the next stage of his solo crossing.
I've looked at it for many days now and come to the realisation, the correct realisation, that really it's the effort, the giving it a go that counts. Not whether you succeed or whether you fail. It's whether you're out there to give it a go, and I think I did that. Unfortunately, my knee just wouldn't take the strain, and I made the right, responsible decision.
Denis Bartell reflects on why he gave up his attempt to cross the Simpson Desert unaided.
It was part of the whole expedition. I'd crossed the desert from west to east solo the year before, and I wanted to do it north to south at the same time, but it wasn't to be. And it was, yes, a very big disappointment personally for me.
After the airdrop of supplies, Bartell rested his knee, occasionally packing it in cool, damp sand to help reduce the swelling. It did the trick. 4 days later, the swelling had subsided, and the desert walker struck south again, this time making better progress.
But it was on the 13th day, I think, that the greatest pleasure. I could recognise, I thought, the tone of the country. And I know this area pretty well out here. And I thought, right, I'm not going to continue on any further south. I'm going to take a gamble and head to the west, or westwards. And I climbed this big dune, and I knew what was going to be on the other side of that the moment I climbed it, before I even got to the top. And I could recognise it immediately. I hadn't been there for years, but that's where David Lindsay passed through, Bullabutna and Palani native wells. And that was a thrilling moment. The first time in 13 days, I positively knew exactly where I was.
When explorer David Lindsay passed through this country on camels in 1886, he wanted to become the first European to cross the Simpson Desert. Setting off from Dalhousie Springs, Lindsay's party headed east, following a string of native wells located for them by an Aboriginal guide. Lindsay was forced to turn back after passing Popel's Corner, and it was another 50 years before an adventurous cattleman, Ted Colson, and a young Aborigine rode their camels across the desert and into Birdsville. 3 years later, in 1939, an Adelaide geologist, Dr. Cecil Madigan, led the first scientific expedition through the Simpson. The exact location of Lindsay's native wells remained a mystery until 5 years ago, when they were rediscovered by Denis Bartell, who followed the directions laid down in the explorer's journal. The well Walporican is under the sandhill on the west side of the plain, and there are some prickly corkwood trees nearby, one of which, 10 chains west of the well, I cut my initials and nailed up a tin plate on which is stamped D. Lindsay, 1886. Bartell recovered the blazed tree and delivered it to a museum in Adelaide. But the well and its promise of drinkable water was a much more exciting find.
David Lindsay, the explorer, in 1886 came through here, and he used this well, or he used a whole chain of them, but this one was one of those wells that he used to water his camels.
There are at least 10 wells like this one, described by Lindsay, but the water is often difficult to reach. Once the drill breaks through a layer of black mud, a baler is lowered on a string and the precious cargo brought to the surface. After the sediment settles to the bottom, the water is quite fit to drink.
Ay,
100 metres from Walpurrican, there's ample evidence to prove that Aborigines not only used the well, but managed to find enough food to live in this part of the desert. The last families of the Wanka-Nugru tribe walked out of the desert at the turn of the century, and they have never returned. After leaving the native well, Bartell encountered a series of dry salt lakes. The largest, Pirapirapulana, stretched for days beyond the desert walker's horizon.
I was trudging along this particular salt lake and I saw this one set of camel pads going out, way out into the lake. There was a bit of a blob out there. I couldn't see any tracks coming back. And I wondered whether perhaps camel had died there. So out of curiosity, I dropped my pack and I went for a stroll. And there was this poor old camel. He'd got down, he'd had a camp up there and got himself stuck well and truly bogged. And he was still alive. And I tried to prise his legs out of the mud as best I could, and remember they're flailing around and all over the place, and I've got such long legs and neck that it was rather difficult to sort of get too close to him. But it was a hopeless situation, and I was going to walk away and leave him. That's the way nature intended him to die, but I just couldn't. I had to cut this one's throat. I couldn't leave him there to die.
Qantas 1 QF1, this is 5 Sierra Bravo X-ray, Denis Bartell. I read you loud and clear back.
Loud and clear also. We have 230 passengers listening in now. How are you going on your walk?
All okay, Captain. I send my very best regards to you and your crew. At the moment I'm situated on the southern edge of the Simpson Desert near Cowrie Station. If your passengers look out the left...
30,000 feet above the sand dunes, airline passengers flying from Sydney to Singapore were able to hear the desert walker make his daily radio report.
As you will realise, the Royal Flying Doctor Service, the aircraft were supplied to the Royal Flying Doctor Service by Qantas in 1927 and for many years after that. So you're very, very much a part of my walk, very closely associated with it. So I'd like to wish you all the very best up there, a pleasant flight, and my regards from down here back.
Thank you very much for all that. And we wish you the very best on the rest of your walk. I'm sure my passengers share the admiration we have for you.
Yes, I have to walk longer each day now because I'm hobbling along. I'm not making the time that I wanted to, or the mileage per day. So to get some reasonable sort of a mile out of the day, I have to walk just longer. And I find I'm on my feet now pretty well all the day. I'm taking a few painkillers every day now. But, well, I think there's about 70 miles to go, so another 5 days and the pain will finish.
Before setting out on his Gulf-to-Gulf walk, Bartell had arranged that on 2 nights every week, he would meditate for several hours.
I set aside a period of time at night just to relax, look at the stars, feel and be with the desert that I am part of, and I'm very much part of it out there. Nothing's moving around me other than natural things, animals, wildlife. There's no intrusion from human beings, none whatsoever, no noise, no pollution. And I can sit down and just relax. One of my low days was after I left the native well, and I was walking along this dune, and suddenly the yellow daisies popped up, and how incredible, there in front of me, right along this sand spur, was just massed with yellow daisies. Boom!
The worst was now behind him. After crossing the Calicupa Creek, Bartell knew he had conquered the desert.
I've been going for nearly 3 weeks, locked into a dunal situation. All I saw to the east, to the west, to the north and to the south were rolling sand dunes. In the southern bit I'd come across some of the big salt lakes, which was a change, but still surrounded by sand dunes. And I plodded up this blessed big sandhill right to the top. I came over the top, and there in front of me was the most incredible sight. I'd broken out of the desert.
It had been 3 months since Bartell had last seen his wife. In that time, he'd walked and dragged his handcart 1,500 kilometres.
Hi.
Cheers.
Come on, Helen, get it on.
Oh, hello, Helen. How are you? Oh, gosh, you're all my best girls here to meet me.
You're beautiful. You're terrific.
It's really a thrill to see you all. It really is. It's been a long, long, hard trip.
Bartell had achieved the first solo crossing of the Simpson Desert from north to south. He'd tramped 440 kilometres in 26 days.
One I saw.
Isn't that lovely? Oh, that's lovely.
For all the birthdays and anniversaries that I've probably missed.
You have missed, yes. You have.
So that's got to make up for 3 odd months plus
thank you,
everything
darling. That's
else.
lovely. That's lovely. Thank you.
The beautiful yellow ones and the everlasting.
After leaving the Simpson Desert, Bartell again picked up his handcart for the final 900-kilometre push down through the South Australian Outback to Adelaide. Having spent 3 months under cloudless skies, Bartell was suddenly confronted by the bleak reality of a southern winter. By now, Bartell was travelling the main tourist route through the Flinders Ranges.
Good morning, Adelaide, on this beautiful Sunday morning. Today, we welcome home Denis Bartell. He's on the final leg of his Gulf-to-Gulf crossing. And at this moment, Denis is walking through the city on his way to Glenelg. So if you see him, if you're out in your car, give him a good friendly wave and a nice toot. That's an absolutely wonderful thing that he's done.
And that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's always some further challenge, something extra that can be done, that needs to be tackled. And it takes heroic individuals to demonstrate to us every now and again just what that is all about. And Denis, you deserve our highest admiration and praise for the great example you've set in your trek across this country.
I normally stand about 6'1" and a bit. Carrying some of the loads I have carried, I think I've shrunk under 6 feet. And I can tell you what I feel about 10 feet tall today, and it's all due to you people. It's a marvellous, marvellous reception and something that I'll remember for the rest of my life.
Really, my philosophy is quite simple. It's to be a participant, not a spectator of life and adventure. To be a winner. In other words, get in there and kick the hell out of life. You're going to be a lot better for it, and so too will this great country of ours.
When white man first came to Australia, there was one dream dominating the minds of the explorers, and that was to find the fabled inland sea. Expeditions pushed towards the centre from the east and the south, and they charted a landscape at once beautiful and terrifying. But many died remote and tragic deaths, while those more fortunate returned broken and defeated. But the stories of an inland sea were based on fact. In 1840, an explorer named Eyre discovered a vast salt lake which would bear his name. Eyre saw it as a glittering crust of white salt, but little did he realise that periodically, perhaps 2 or 3 times a century, a great deluge in the north and east would fill the lake. And now it's happening again, and I'm going to canoe the floodwaters as they make their way down the Cooper Creek from Queensland on a journey to Australia's inland sea. Okay. Let him roll now. Go. Good man. Great. I've boated a lot of miles on Australian waterways. A few years ago I came down from Queensland to the Murray Mouth. That was 3,500 kilometres on the Murray-Darling system. But I've always wanted to do one of these normally dry inland rivers, and this year the opportunity presented itself. The big floods in Queensland are all working down this river, the Cooper Creek, making towards that vast and normally dry salt lake, Lake Eyre. And I guess I had to do this one. It's maybe the last opportunity I'll get in my lifetime to ride this river. The Cooper Creek is normally a dry channel. It winds 1,000 kilometres from the confluence of the Barcoo and the Thompson Rivers in tropical Queensland.
And this year, the flooding rains gathered into a vast body of water, which began its long journey down the creek. Ahead of the water, the channel is as dry as the desert which surrounds it. Behind the torrent, as the flow passes, the creek bed dries again to mud and eventually dust. Because I must go with the flow, I estimate my journey will take about 3 months.
Well, thanks very much, Mike.
Good, Dennis. Bon voyage. Very good.
Hello, Dave.
Have a good trip, Dennis.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Dennis.
All the best. Thanks once again.
Very good. Have a good trip.
Yep. See you one day.
I've chosen as my point of departure a place of special significance in the history of Australian exploration. In Queensland, a few miles east of the township of Inaminka, there lies the site of one of the great tragedies of early years of European settlement. When you look at this, it's hard to imagine Burke and Wills died on this stretch of water. You come up here and you think, wow, this is like a garden land. There are fish and there's bird life. How could anyone die here? Well, this is the famous dig tree on the Cooper Creek. Its importance relates to the early exploration of this vast country of ours. It hadn't been crossed. 130 years ago, no one had crossed, no white man had crossed this continent. And a group arrived up from the south to this tree on the banks of this river. And they made a base camp here, and they were going to push on to the north. And 4 of them took off, Burke, Wills, King and Grey. And they headed off to the north. They reached the other side of the continent, found salt water and turned around on a mad race to get back here. They pulled in one night. They came into this place. They were tired, they were worn out, they'd already buried one of their members, and they arrived here and it was deserted. And they found this tree with a blaze on it, and it said dig 3 feet to the west. And down here, just here, they found a cache of food. Unfortunately, they hadn't put any clothes with them. That's the thing they most wanted, was shoes and clothing. But they had the food. The base party had left that morning, and the stage was now set for disaster. They were too weak to follow them, so they opted for another alternative, and that was to proceed down this river, the Cooper Creek, and try to strike off into South Australia down the Strzelecki Creek. Unfortunately, lack of water beat them back, and they were forced to camp along this water. 3 months later, 2 of them had died. Had left one member, King. Burke and Wills, of course, had died months before. And that's why I've chosen this point to start my journey, I guess, as a tribute to brave men, or foolish men, on my long journey down the Cooper Creek to that vast inland sea, Lake Eyre. What is it about this remote outback that attracts the adventurer in me? Is it the solitude, the endless miles of untamed wilderness? Is it the challenge of surviving this inhospitable land? I've made many solo journeys across Australia, by vehicle, by boat, on foot, and many of them have written my name into the record books. But this journey down the Cooper Creek to Lake Eyre is a more personal one. This river is a fleeting thing. It's the product of circumstances that occur once or twice in a lifetime. For me to canoe the length of Cooper Creek, it's truly now or never. You know, this is what I love about my journeys out into the outback. To be able to sit around a warm fire on a cold night. 360 degrees of stars all around me, horizon to horizon. Clarity that's superb. This journey is rather different to my other river ventures. They were fairly much in defined channels. This little creek, this Cooper Creek, presents a vastly different set of problems and hazards. I've got a vast network of fine interconnecting channels to navigate through, and then the water breaks out into vast flooded out areas. Not so long ago, this was 40 kilometres wide. And then it's got to fill hundreds of lakes back up into interdural flats. So navigation on this one, I think, is going to be one of the main difficulties I have to contend with. But then, that's what this is all about, really. Without this, where would the challenge be? On my other river journeys, breaking records was the prime motivation. But on the Cooper Creek, if I go too fast, I'll catch up with the headwaters. Then I'd only have a dry creek bed to paddle on. So on this journey, I've got time to explore and to enjoy the landscape. Well, just downstream of my position here is Cullymurra Waterhole. It's the deepest inland waterhole in inland Australia. And because it was permanent in nature, it became a focal point for Aboriginal and habitation throughout this area. Even the trade routes of Australia all passed through here. And evidence of their living here, their habitation, is in these engravings carved into this rock. We don't know what they mean. Even the local Aborigines, the modern Aborigines, do not understand their meaning. That's all lost in the Dreamtime. They've been estimated to be in the vicinity of 30,000 years old. And by gosh, when I sit here and amongst this and in this little amphitheatre, I feel rather insignificant.
Cooper Creek has many moves, and sluggish waters soon give way to rushing torrents. At this speed, to hit a tree or a submerged rock would spell disaster, but there's nothing for it but to put myself at the mercy of the creek. Much of the land through which the Cooper flows is barren and desolate. This is one of the driest places on Earth, with an annual rainfall of less than 100 millimetres. It's hardly enough to sustain even the saltbush which dots the landscape. But when the rains fall in tropical Queensland, hundreds of kilometres to the northeast, a torrent of water flows down the Cooper Creek, inundating the surrounding countryside. A labyrinth of lagoons and channels etch the landscape, and navigation at water level becomes a nightmare. This is the region which lies ahead of me, and one wrong turn could lead me into an endless quagmire, a death trap of mud and isolation. My only hope is to follow the established trees which line the main channel, and to follow where I can the strongest flow of current. But for much of its journey, the Cooper Creek forms a well-defined river, snaking ever onwards across this vast landscape. Days of paddling turn to weeks. I'm free of human contact, except for the occasional radio sked with Mike Steele at Inaminka.
The 5 Sierra Bravo X-ray, I copy you loud and clear. Go ahead.
SEU, yes. Good evening, Denis. And just see how you're going and what sort of a day you had back.
Well, okay, Mike, yes. I'm about 25k from Inaminka and about 7 kilometres past Will's Grave, I had hoped to make a little bit better time today, but ran into bad weather about 11 o'clock and rain and of course the wind coming down the river started to chop it up a bit, so I pulled in about 1 o'clock and made camp. Although tonight clear blue skies again down here and a big bright moon up there. All okay, best regards to you all back there and catch up with you again another night. 5 Sierra Bravo X-ray off and clear. Have a good night. Cheers now.
Actually, this mighty flood coming down the Cooper is giving life and it's taking life. When it dries back, the feed through all the channel country will be great for the cattle people. But it's taking life. As the water's rising, it's creating a multitude of little islands. And on those islands, the rabbits are trapped, cats are trapped, and dingoes. And this is Cheetah. I called her Cheetah because, well, I think she cheated death. I rescued her from one of these little islands. She was stuck there by herself, completely alone. I don't know what happened to the rest of the family. I guess they were washed away from another island and she's probably made it to this little one. It's only about the size of a small room. And I spotted her there and I paddled over furiously. She didn't take too kindly to that. She went for the water and I went after her. And anyhow, I've rescued her and she's quietened down tremendously. So that's my little Cheetah. Cheetah, my dingo pup.
It's hard to tell what effect these floods are having on the native wildlife, but for some it must be devastating. You know, this is no ordinary Australian river, undergoing annual cycles of rise and fall. The animals around here expect years of drought, and many are taken by surprise when the creek suddenly flows. Normally I leave the wildlife alone as I travel these remote regions. I live off the supplies I bring with me, but with another mouth to feed, I'm on the lookout for rabbits. These animals which we introduced have wreaked havoc with the Australian landscape, and I'm more than happy to catch one for Cheetah. And let's face it, that's what a mother would bring home for Tucker anyway.
You're getting close enough without making a spill. Steady there. Steady there. A little bunny.
Well, people ask me how I survive out here. I guess the answer to that is quite simply. There's a lot I could take from the land, there's a lot of game around, but I'd prefer not to. I think we've got to protect what we've got now. We've decimated it so much on this planet that if we're not careful, we'll have nothing left. And certainly our children will hate us for it. So I now use a very simple diet. For breakfast, I have a cereal which I made up, roasted myself, some raisins and banana chips. And for lunch, it's Wheat Bix, good old standby, a muesli bar, and a packet of dried fruit, nuts, assorted types. And that's lunch, and for the evening meal it's very, very simple. Packet of potato, instant potato, peas and carrots, a couple of packets of soup, rice, and that's and some biscuits. And that's how I live, very simply, because I'd rather put my time into exploring. I'm not a good cook, and I'd rather put my time into wandering around. So I guess, if you like, I just treat food as fuel for the journeys that I'm on. I don't know, this journey seems to be turning into a rescue mission for wild animals. What have I got here? Looks like a bearded dragon. Come on, old son. Come on, we'll take you over and put you on the land. Come on. Here we are. There we are. Oops. Hey, there we are. Hey.
You're a fierce-looking fellow, aren't you? No wonder they call you a dragon.
Come on, we'll let you go now, eh? There we are. Yeah. Come on, off you go. There's the boy. Okay, Cheetah, come on, let's go. Cheetah, come on, let's go. Okay. Come on. On our way. That's it. Sit up. Okay.
It would be easy to forget as I paddle this mighty waterway that out there, beyond that line of trees, lies one of the world's greatest deserts. But the thought is never far from my mind that somewhere up ahead the creek is dry. There are so many lakes and side channels for the headwaters to fill before they can continue their journey that I wonder whether the creek can ever make it to Lake Eyre.
Well, I've done hundreds of kilometres now on this mighty floodway, the Cooper Creek, and 2 days ahead of me, the water stops. What's happening? It's filling all these massive lakes that run off the main channel. Lake Hope, for example, is a mighty body of water, and it's taking enormous drainage off this channel. And just a few miles from there, and 2 days paddle from here, there's no more water down the creek. So what I've got to do is pick myself a nice little camp spot, and I'll hole up for a couple of weeks and let the lakes fill, and then hopefully it'll continue on down the channel. What I'm aiming for, of course, is Lake Eyre. That's the goal. But I don't know, maybe it'll only make the Birdsville Track. It's all a gamble. Well, that's the fun of it.
Isn't it? Come on. Oh, what do you think about that, eh? Look at that sun, that sunset. Isn't it pretty?
Well, there's an absolutely superb spot I've picked here with this magnificent live sand dune behind me. Beautiful red colour, magic still water. I've got to fill in a couple of weeks here, but I think there'll be plenty to do. There's sand dunes all around me, rolling sand dunes, and what I'm going to do is get out and scout around, see what I can find. It's been a tremendous trip since I left the Dig Tree in Queensland. So many memories. I guess the ones that come to mind are the 2 nights spent strapped to my canoe in the middle of a swamp. I don't think I want to repeat that again. But that was part of the deal, part of the fun. Right, I know what these tracks are, and it's just the one set going down here in this hole. Ah, there he is. Got him. Here we are. It's a goanna. You know, the Dairy tribe that lived here long ago would have called him Favourite Tucker. His claws are sharp. Look at the darn things. And the grip he's got on me. Well, this one won't end up as Tucker. Go on, away you go, Buster. One of the things that I loved doing was, at the end of the day, making my camp and then getting out and walking in the dunes. An incredible feeling, this vast land of rolling dunes held together by spinifex and cane grass, existing on an inch or two a rainy year. And all the seeds here are just time-locked, waiting. And then that deluge comes and they burst with energy. And this is what we've got. Fantastic place, a garden land, absolutely superb. I love it. When I was over in Europe recently, I marvelled at the monuments to man, thousands of years old. And I came back to my country and I thought, what have I got here? We're only 200 odd years old. We don't have those monuments, or do we? What history do we have? Well, it's all here. When I was up at Inaminka, I pointed out the rock carvings, estimated to be somewhere around 30,000 years old.
Well, here I've got the same marks again. All these rock chippings. Man sat here thousands of years ago, and he chipped his tools of trade, his spears, his cutting stones. And he also feasted here, and I can tell that because of the shell pieces. He got the mussels out of the waterhole over there, brought them over here and sat down and feasted. So we do have a history here. A long, long time. These are some of the things that I've just collected. There's the mussels. These came out of the river, the little mussel clam. Came out of the waterhole over there, and this is what he feasted on. Sat here and munched his meal. Spear points. They were cut or chipped out of rock. Rock came in and it was smashed up into sections, and then by careful chipping with this stone, he actually broke off these edges, flaked them off, and formed that perfect spear point. That was affixed to the spear for his hunting. And what they did, they used the kangaroo sinew, and they'd bind that spear, that point onto the spear, and then they used a spinifex glue, and they put a big lump over that, and that held it firmly on the end of that spear, on the end of the spear shaft. We're also on this trade routes right through this country, and you can tell that because here I have some ochre, and this came from hundreds of kilometres to the south of here in the Flinders Ranges. There's a yellow and there's a red. Actually, I'll just smash some up and you can see what it's all about. This incidentally is a grinding base. They used to put their seed in here or whatever it is they wish to grind, then grind it or mill it. This is some yellow ochre. I'll show you what happens here. So that was used for their dress-up occasions. And we've also got red. Red and the yellow. That was all brought into this area. All these slabs of rock were carried in and traded. And I guess they traded for pitchery, which was, I guess in modern day terms we'd call it marijuana or whoopee weed. Well, I guess that was their alternative. It was pitchery. And that came from out in these desert areas. And they'd bring this rock in and they'd make their trade. These were warlike people through here. But the people carrying these goods, these implements, the ochre, they were allowed through unharmed. They could travel through on these routes without any fear whatsoever. So we do have a history here, as evidence in these artefacts that I've picked up or scattered all around here. Aboriginal man didn't create permanent things. He was a nomadic man. He followed the food, the seasons, and so he didn't leave his mark in the normal sense of buildings and monuments, but he left his imprint in these dunes where the soft sand has been blown away, and now we can see evidence of his inhabitation, thousands and thousands of years old. Well, Cheetah, another day, another mile. Let's go and get them. In the 3 weeks we've stayed here, it's Cheetah who's made me aware of time. As the floodwaters have flowed on down the creek, she's grown from a puppy into a fine young dingo. And now we're on our way again to see if we can make it to the Birdsville Track.
Okay, Cheetah, we're on our way.
Not too many years ago, this bird was hunted ruthlessly. Isn't it magnificent? You know, once it wasn't uncommon to see 10 or 15 at a time hung up on a barbed wire fence. But now, thankfully, the wedge-tailed eagle is fully protected. You know, if we get another go at life, I'd like to come back as one of these. After hundreds of kilometres, this is my first sign of inhabitation. I've reached the famous Birdsville ferry. Year after year it lies on the bank unused, just waiting for a flood like this to roar down the channel and close the Birdsville Track. The traffic will be forced to detour 40 kilometres from its normal route through the desert to cross the creek at this point. Up ahead of me lies the Birdsville Track. It's so close I can almost smell it. But before I get there, I have to cross this last great lake formed by these floodwaters as they spread across this desert landscape. And this is it, Lake Kilapapuna, 10 kilometres long and 5 wide. You know, this water is so shallow I could almost jump out and walk. Way out here in the middle of this lake, my destination is lost in the haze. I'm forced to use a compass to navigate. Somewhere in those dead trees on the margin, I have to find a passage through to reach the track.
One mighty heave, he lands on the Birdsville Track. Well, Cheetah, we made it. This was the driest cattle run in the world. I used to drive the cattle from Birdsville down to Murray. This is the famed Birdsville Track, and I've made it. After all these months on the water, I've got here. And also the headwater. Well, the water's made it to the Birdsville Track. It's lapping the edge of it now. Won't cross for a day or two, and there's got an enormous flood out here to go over, and then another 50 or 60 miles of channel. So I'm doubtful actually that it'll get to Lake Eyre. Also, temperature's increasing up here now. It won't be long before we've got 40, 45 degree, and that's going to dry up the water very, very quickly. And Lake Eyre is also drying up, so I've got to move on now and get down there by vehicle because I want to have a look at my inland sea before it reverts back to just a big salt lake.
After months in a canoe, it's a strange feeling to be back in a car again. But if the creek won't take me, I'll just have to drive. Cheetah doesn't like it much though. She's already been sick once. Actually, I'm driving down the bed of the Cooper, and this is where the water would have come if it had got this far. Who knows? Maybe it will. But whether it does or not, Lake Eyre has already become an inland sea. Exceptional local rains have filled the lake, and any water added by the Cooper will only be a bonus. Between the Birdsville Track and Lake Eyre stretches 150 kilometres of sun-blasted Gibber Plain and sand dunes. This is the Tarari Desert, and what a contrast with the flooded country I've been following.
Well, 4 months ago, I departed the Dig Tree in Queensland and travelled down that magnificent Cooper Creek to reach the Birdsville Track. And what an incredible feeling to have arrived at that point. I look back on that journey, and I've done many on water. I have to say, without a doubt, it's one of the most unique rivers that I've ever travelled on. As a matter of fact, I'd rate it with any in the world in uniqueness. It was a superb journey and a beautiful trip. My goal always has been Lake Eyre. This is it. This is it behind me here. This is my inland sea. Isn't it absolutely beautiful? Come on, Cheetah. Let's go and canoe it. It's an Australian irony that one of the driest places in the world should be at the centre of one of the biggest inland drainage basins in the world, 1.3 million square kilometres. Lake Eyre is like a huge bowl sunk into the middle of Australia. The land here is around 15 metres below sea level, and once the waters have flowed into it, they have nowhere else to go. Evaporation is their only escape, and it's amazing that within a year this vast body of water will have dried back to the salt crust, which is its normal state. 1,000 metres beneath the surface lies an even bigger body of water, the Great Artesian Basin, the largest in the world. Its waters come from even further away, but little reaches the surface, so Lake Eyre is like two bowls, stacked one above the other. The lower always full, the upper usually dry. At first, the water in the lake is mostly fresh, and fish swept down the rivers thrive and grow. Brine shrimp and other small creatures multiply in the waters, and flocks of birds wheel in to feed on the bounty. For a few months there is plenty, but as the temperature rises towards 40 degrees and evaporation overtakes the inward flow, the lake will become ever more salty. Water is the giver of life, but it also takes life. Birds that live and multiply here will be forced to migrate. Some will make it, some won't. Fish will die, brine shrimp will die, and the whole area will revert to dry salt. That's how nature intended it. What an incredible contrast exists here. I departed from the Dig Tree, focal point for that ill-fated Burke and Wills expedition, and I guess I'm searching or seeking an experience to bring me closer to them, to understand their hardships, the challenges, the mental strain that they must have had in trying to cross unknown lands. I guess, you know, I'm probably an old explorer, come back for a second go.
Of an inland sea. A BC woman is getting in shape for a grueling trek across the unforgiving Simpson Desert in Australia next month. Susan Bartell, along with 3 friends from the land down under, are making the 385-kilometre journey to raise money and awareness for breast cancer. Olivia Cheng has more on the women's arduous challenge.
The Simpson Desert, one of Australia's driest, most desolate regions. With its sea of red sand ridges, it's one of the world's most uninhabitable places. Few have managed to cross its expanse, yet 44-year-old Susan Bartell, along with several friends, hopes to make the journey for a good cause.
We are 4 very ordinary women, and this is just life-changing. It is probably the best thing I've ever done in my entire life.
Bartell, originally from Australia and now living in Silver Star, BC, spends most of her days training for the 385-kilometre trek. She's one of 4 women known down under as the Desert Mums, lifelong friends who will cross the Simpson Desert to raise money and awareness for breast cancer research.
We started this journey about 1.5 years ago to raise money and awareness for breast cancer, and we've been calling up businesses, writing to as many people as possible and trying to get research money for breast cancer, and along the way also promoting early detection and self-breast examinations and mammograms.
The seeds for this journey were actually planted 22 years ago when Bartell's father Denis completed the first recorded solo and unaided walk across the Simpson. His journey was documented by Australian Geographic. He went on to win the Order of Australia and inspired his daughter to literally follow in his footsteps one day.
I asked him then if I could walk with him, and he scoffed and said the desert is no place for a lady. And a 1.5 years ago the idea resurfaced, and that's why we're walking the desert.
It has growth, spinifex, cane grass and stunted wattles, acacias, corkwood trees.
Now family history is about to come full circle. Not only has Denis had a change of heart, but via video phone, he's helping his daughter plan her trip, and he'll accompany the Desert Mums as their guide.
Very dry. It can go down to 1 or 2 inches of rain a year.
Like her father before her, there will be grueling conditions to overcome throughout the 18-day walk, a hardship Bartell is more than willing to endure to help a cause close to her heart.
I think breast cancer seems to have touched so many lives. It's like everyone you talk to has a breast cancer story. And all of us as mums that are going on this walk have friends and family that are suffering breast cancer at the moment.
The Desert Mums will start crossing the Simpson Desert May the 5th. They're hoping to raise $105,000 for breast cancer research and have already collected $95,000. If you'd like to make a donation or you'd just like some more information about the Desert Mums, check out their website at www.desertmums, note that's mums with a U.com.
Of all the ways to raise money for the fight against breast cancer, it's not one many people would take on, let alone 4 middle-aged women. But one BC woman and 3 Australians decided that they were going to do nothing less than walk across a desert, Australia's Simpson Desert to be exact, nearly 500 kilometres stretching across the corners of 3 Australian states. As Anna Gabar reports in the first of a 3-part series, one of the women is following in the footsteps of her father.
22 years ago, an Australian man named Denis Bartell became the first non-Aboriginal to cross Australia's Simpson Desert alone and unaided. At the time, Bartell was realizing a lifelong goal, challenging himself to conquer adversity and perhaps even death in the most unforgiving of landscapes. His success earned him the Order of Australia medal. But what Bartell didn't know was that his journey would inspire 4 women to trek the Simpson Desert in his footsteps, to also face adversity and through their journey raise money to help others triumph over breast cancer.
I think breast cancer seems to have touched so many lives. It's like everyone you talk to has a breast cancer story. And all of us as mums that are going on this walk have friends and family that are suffering breast cancer at the moment.
More than 2 decades after her father's historic trek, the adventurer's daughter, Susie, is a 44-year-old mother calling the Okanagan Silver Star Resort home. A winter playground for most is Susie's cross-training terrain. And for the past 18 months, Susie has been preparing her mind and body to meet the Simpson.
Got just flat on the bar. I've never done that before.
But Susie is not alone. Her fight against breast cancer takes her back home to Australia, where she meets up with 3 lifelong friends. This group of middle-aged mothers becomes a team. They call themselves the Desert Mums.
Excited now. It's time. It's been 18 months, so yeah, we're excited.
From Adelaide, a small charter plane takes the mums north to Dalhousie Springs on the western edge of the Simpson Desert. The starting point for their journey is an ancient site where Aboriginals once came for water, food, and medicine. This late afternoon swim is savoured.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Today is the first of 18. The terrain is flat. But tomorrow, the Desert Mums will tackle the first of 1,200 sand dunes. There will be freezing desert nights, blazing daytime heat of 45 degrees Celsius.
Listen to your desert and feel it.
Those are the words of Denis Bartell himself, who has returned to the desert he once trekked alone. His experience will prove invaluable to the women as he and one of the mums' husbands go ahead to bury supplies for the days to come and then set up camp for the weary trekkers.
The way things are going, if we can do 30 kilometres tomorrow, I'll be very pleased. Within the next couple of days we'll tell. I'd like them to do 30 kilometres a day, and that'll keep me right on schedule.
If the donkeys come in to attack, girls, all get together back to back, right? Don't give them any quarter, yell and scream and wave your arms. We'll frighten them off.
Do back to back, yell and scream, wave your arms.
I've got a swift kick.
All right.
They set out at 4:45 each morning.
Which way do we go?
Where do we go? Where do we go?
They'll hike for 8 hours before retreating to tents in the afternoon to escape the midday sun and flies. There will be cramping muscles, severe blisters, swelling, and a host of natural wildlife to look out for. But none of this deters the Desert Mums.
It just radiates pain at the back of my leg. Anyway, just said if this was easy, we wouldn't be out here.
How's the morning been?
Sore, but that's okay.
Sore where?
At the back of my heels. But I'm doing the desert shuffle. It's not the desert walk anymore, it's the desert shuffle.
A sense of humor despite the grueling conditions and a clear focus on why they're here.
Every time any of us think, it's just too hard or my body's feeling sore, you just automatically switch and think of someone that we know with breast cancer and what they've had to go through with chemotherapy and operations, and this is nothing. This is a walk in the park compared to what those women do, and you keep that in perspective and it becomes easier. It certainly does.
I mean, we wouldn't have chosen the cause if we weren't passionate about it, and if we didn't feel strongly, we'll have personal reasons for that, and I hope we can make a difference.
Tomorrow night, we follow the Desert Mums to the halfway point of their trek, where one of the women gets some tragic news about a friend back home. Part 2 tonight of our series on 4 women, 1 from BC and 3 from Australia, who embarked on a grueling physical challenge to raise money for the fight against breast cancer. The women decided to trek across Australia's Simpson Desert, more than 400 kilometres of harsh wilderness, and up and down hundreds of slippery sand dunes. Tonight, they reached the halfway point, as one woman received some tragically ironic news.
Sunrise over the Simpson, and the desert comes to life.
Come on, out of bed, everyone.
Oh, God. Hi, Dad.
Come on, daughter. Chop, chop.
Oh, God. Always picks on his daughter.
The Desert Mums are halfway to their goal. So far, they have trekked over 200 kilometres. The distance is wearing on them. And before setting out, minor surgery on one of the mums' heels.
My ankle is all swollen. I think it's because I've favoured the blister, so I've walked a different way. And it's a figure 8, Margaret. And I pulled something.
Bye. Bye. Good luck, girls.
Bye.
Barely 30 steps into today's 30K trek, the Desert Mums push on, determined to finish. But some in the group are beginning to doubt whether everyone will finish together.
Actually, yesterday her blisters got worse, which was really surprising.
Well, I think what you've got to do now is let her win or lose herself.
Oh, absolutely.
And slow down a bit, but somewhere along the line, if she says that's it, then big hugs and kisses, and that's it.
Carolyn perseveres through her pain. Susie's back muscles have tightened.
Really hard 10Ks this morning. That's all right. I am 44.
Not far on, a major morale boost. A new supporter has found them on the track and comes bearing an unlikely desert gift.
Apricot layer cake in the camp oven. And you baked that last night? Baked that last night, yeah.
I think it's awesome. They've just shown, what tenacity and strength they've got to do this. It's just an incredible feat when you see we drive it and they've walked it.
Thank you so much.
Others hand over cash donations inspired by the mums' cause. In total, their desert encounters alone will raise over $1,000.
The car goes, are you accepting donations now? And, we said, yes, of course. And $50. So generous. It's very nice.
We've been looking for you since we left our housey. And every time we met someone along the track coming the opposite way, they'd give us a rough update on where you were. So the whole bush telegraph is working.
Spirits lifted, the desert mums trek on. But Carolyn is clearly suffering and later reveals that it is more than blisters causing her pain. A friend has lost her battle with breast cancer.
She was lovely. All the women that I know have died of breast cancer have gone through so much more pain to stay alive, to see their children a little bit longer. So this is nothing. This is absolutely nothing what I'm going through. It is twinges and pains. It is absolutely nothing.
Then a gesture of remembrance for the victims of breast cancer, a symbolic renaming of an area lake.
This lake was named in the memory of over 375,000 women worldwide who lose their lives to breast cancer each and every year.
The journey to Lake Courage, we all felt was up and down sand hills, and really, really hard. And I guess we liken that to what women with breast cancer go through, those up and down hills that they have to climb in their treatment and in their steps to their survival.
Every woman I meet, every single woman I meet has this breast cancer story. It's not just one or two, it's everyone. That's not right. So, so hopefully we can make a small difference or change a path.
Keep going.
Thank
Look after yourselves. Be good and happy feet.
Thank you. Bye-bye, girls.
Bye-bye, girls.
Standing back as the mums reach the halfway point of their journey is Denis Bartell, ready to help if needed, but knowing the mums have to see the trek through on their own.
I've had my ups and downs. There's been moments when I've counted one out and then I've counted the other out and I've said to myself, oh, damn, they're confusing me. But I know now, I know in my heart, they are going to make it. Their determination, their strength, their guts, absolute guts, is incredible. And I feel very proud of them. I might even have a little cry.
And if you'd like to help the women raise money for breast cancer research, you can do so at their website at desertmoms.com. We've been following their remarkable trek for the past 2 nights, and tonight we follow them to the end. 4 middle-aged women, one from BC, crossing Australia's 400-kilometre Simpson Desert to raise money for the fight against breast cancer. At the halfway point, at least one mum wasn't sure she could make it. Tonight, the last part of their grueling journey.
For the last 2 weeks, this group of friends, 4 middle-aged women with a connection that stretches from BC to Australia, have bonded over a common goal. They are crossing the Simpson Desert to raise money for breast cancer research. This is day 14 of 18, and the Desert Mums' journey is drawing to a close.
And we've crossed the Simpson Desert legally. So legally, we've ticked a box.
But first, the mums have a final sand dune to cross. It stands 40 meters above the desert and is a challenging menace for even four-wheel drives. The dune is known as Big Red, named by Denis Bartell over 2 decades ago when he made his solo journey across the Simpson. Crossing Big Red will be the final physical challenge for the Desert Mums.
Can I ask you guys what you think of the Desert Mums?
I reckon they're pretty marvellous.
Absolutely sensational.
I heard them interviewed on the radio a week before I left when we were packing, and I said we will meet them on the QAA line. And as I said today, we met them on the QAA line.
On top of Big Red, a group of four-wheel drive tourists wait to welcome the mums.
A lot of four-wheel drives have more trouble than that.
More reliable than four-wheel drive.
Most certainly.
We thought we'd show them how to do it.
That's big. That's big.
Dennis, too, is waiting for his daughter.
And I named this damn thing 30 years ago. I didn't reckon my daughter would be walking over it too. Oh, sweetie, get the sun out of your eyes. There you are.
Oh, wow.
What do you reckon?
Oh, awesome.
Good, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You've all made it. Wonderful stuff.
Overwhelmingly awesome. Unbelievably awesome.
The whole lot of them are champions. And I'm dirty, my hair's scruffy, but I take my hat off to them. They're marvellous.
After 2 grueling weeks, the mums will take a day to relax before completing the final leg of their trek.
This is just amazing. I said to the girls walking in, the fact that Dad named this Big Red around 30 years ago just made it even more special. It was like watching these guys climb up in their vehicles thinking they're climbing up my dad's hill. And it's good. I can't believe we've done it.
You ready to go?
On the eve of the journey's end, the Desert Mums set in motion a legacy they hope their own children will fulfill. They bury a time capsule containing letters, pictures, and mementos from this trek for the next generation to return here to collect in another 22 years.
He'll be with us. He'll be 98. He'll be cool.
But there is still one final task to complete. The mums awake at 4 a.m. to blow up 2,500 balloons to symbolize the number of women and men who are killed by the disease each year in Australia alone. The effort takes 5 hours and is made even more difficult because a severe sandstorm is sweeping through the area.
We're going to take one up at a time because it's pretty windy today. We've all got our handles. Either that or we'll be hot air ballooning somewhere over Birdsville, which technically would be cheating. So we don't want to do that.
With the helping hands of friends, the 2 nets, each holding hundreds of balloons, are opened, releasing into the sky the small pink and blue symbols of a person lost to breast cancer. Swiftly, each balloon is swept away by the desert wind. It is the pinnacle of the Desert Mums' quest.
Yeah, a bit bittersweet. Saying goodbye to each other in a few days, and I'm not looking forward to saying goodbye to my dad today.
A gravel road leads the mums to their final destination, Birdsville, a tiny outback settlement on the edge of the Simpson Desert. But despite its remote location, the local pub has rallied its guests and in a single night has raised another $1,000 for the Desert Mums, bringing their total to over $120,000, nearly enough for a 4-year research grant.
Here's to the Desert Mums. Cheers. Woo! Hopefully we made a difference. Hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. Would I do it again? Probably not the desert, but I wouldn't trade this moment with these girls for anything.
Woo!